So my name is Robert Lustig. I am a pediatric neuroendocrinologist, which means that I study how the brain controls hormones and how hormones control the brain. So I am an expert in obesity and diabetes and nutrition and metabolism and neuroscience. So I am very interested in why everyone is now so fat and sick and what to do about it. People think that the obesity is because of two behaviors, gluttony and sloth. And the reason they think this is because they believe that obesity follows the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, just shifted around. In human terms, what they believe is if you eat it, you better burn it or you're going to store it. And therefore, weight gain is a manifestation of either too much intake or too little expenditure or both. In which case, if you're fat, it's your fault. In which case, the only answer is diet and exercise. In which case, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. And the reason is because they believe that calories are the same, that the calorie in a Coca-Cola equals the calorie in a kumquat. That turns out not to be the case. A calorie burned is a calorie burned, but a calorie eaten is not a calorie eaten, because different calories are metabolized in the body differently. That is my research. That is what I've been working on over the past several years. And what we've learned is that the calories in processed food are particularly obesogenic. The same nutrients in either unprocessed or ultra-processed food, the ultra-processed food will actually cause you to gain weight, cause you to eat more, and cause you to burn less. So turns out that a calorie is not a calorie. And if you believe that a calorie is not a calorie, then the question, of course, is, well, which calories are the problem and which calories are the solution? And what I can say is all food is inherently good. It's what we do to the food that's not. What we do to the food, I mean, we do, many things to the food, but ultra-processed food I can sum up in 4 precepts. So the combination of too much sugar, which causes metabolic disease on its own, the lack of fiber, which prevents the intestine from being able to block some of that sugar from getting into your bloodstream. So more gets in and therefore more damage. The emulsifiers, which cause the eating away of the mucin layer, which is one of the protective barriers in the intestine, leading to gut inflammation and therefore systemic inflammation, and also the lack of anti-inflammatory fatty acids. Those 4 things are the primary defects in our food supply. And we have shown, and many others have shown, that when you get people off a ultra-processed food diet and back on a real food diet, they lose weight, their GI symptoms get better. If you believe that it's about calories, then you would say the people are the problem. So it matters. And so my job is to try to explain to the public why they've got it wrong and why we have to rethink our food supply. You cannot fix lifespan until you fix health span. You cannot improve longevity until you take care of the problems that are causing mortality. And right now, there are 8, count them, 8 separate pathologies that are going on inside your body that ultra-processed food is speeding up and making worse. And until we stop those 8, no attempts at longevity will be successful. Now, what are those 8? For one, glycation, the binding of glucose molecules or fructose molecules to proteins to render them less flexible and increased risk for cell death. Oxidative stress, that is reactive oxygen species, which damage lipids and proteins and cause cell death.
Mhm.
Chondrial dysfunction, which is necessary to generate the ATP to power your cells. Insulin resistance, which is necessary to make your cells burn properly and rapidly and completely. Membrane instability, in order to keep the membranes in your cells functional and not um, uh, uh, friable and causing cell injury. Inflammation. The inflammation comes from the gut mostly. Methylation, methyl groups bind onto the DNA to cause changes in the expression of different genes, which ultimately lead to disease. And lastly, autophagy. Now, autophagy is a good thing, so it's the lack of autophagy. Now, autophagy is basically garbage night for the cell, getting rid of protein aggregates, lipid peroxidation products, things that basically gum up the workings of the cell. Those 8 processes are going on inside all of us all the time. The faster they occur, the quicker you die. The slower they occur, the longer you live. Just that simple. And so the question, of course, is, well, what causes them and how do you fix them? And the answer is each one of those is caused by bad food. And each one of those is made better by getting rid of the ultra-processed food. So people say, well, what about exercise? Isn't exercise good for you? And yes, exercise is very good for you. And I'm totally for exercise. But of those 8 that I just mentioned, only 4 of them are made better by exercise. Mention the ones that are not made better. Glycation is not made better. Oxidative stress is not made better. Membrane instability is not made better. And methylation is not made better. We have companies that are making money hand over fist. The global profit margin of the food industry is $9 trillion a year, but chronic metabolic disease costs the world $11 trillion a year. The environmental costs of our ultra-processed food production and consumption is $7 trillion a year, and there's also a $1 trillion a year loss in productivity. So when you do the math, we spend $19 trillion a year cleaning up the food industry's mess. So that's a deficit of 10 trillion a year because of our processed food habit. So what we need for people to understand is that the ultra processed food paradigm has been a singular failure. People think that our ability to increase production has solved the problems of poverty and the problems of famine. And to some extent, that is true. But the question, I guess, to your audience needs to think about is, which is worse, no food or bad food? We have a military in the United States that is supposedly second to none, except that all the generals are very concerned because obesity is now a matter of national security. And the US government even put out a famous report called Too Fat to Fight. How is this hurting us? It's hurting us in enormous ways. It's very obvious. It's very clear, both from a security standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint. Real food is the answer. The problem is that there isn't enough land and ocean to produce enough real food for 10 billion people by the year 2050. And so, unfortunately, and I say this all the time, processed food is not going away. As much as I would like it to go away, it's not going away. And so what we have to do is we have to figure out how to mitigate the metabolic risk, how to reduce the chance of dying from our current food supply. So the question is, can you make processed food healthy? That's the question. And the answer is actually you can. You have to adhere to three principles. Those three principles are outlaid in the book that I wrote called Metabolical. And what the three principles are, 9 words, 3 principles: protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Those 3 things: protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Any food, processed or not, that does all 3 is healthy. Any food that does none of them, processed or not, is poison. So the question is, can you create processed food that does all 3? And the answer is yes, you can, if you know what you're doing, and if you have to do it a little differently. And that's what we are doing. We're actually working with a company in the Middle East. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's called Kuwaiti Danish Dairy Company, or KD. And they are the Nestle of the Middle East. They make frozen yogurt, they flavored milks, ice cream, confectionery, tomato sauce, biscuits, But we are working with them to re-engineer their entire food portfolio, all 180 items, to be metabolically healthy. And we now have data from studies that were done in Kuwait with their new versions, their new re-engineered formulations of these foods, and show clear metabolic benefit. So it is possible. It's just that current food companies are not doing it. They don't understand what the problem is because they think the problem is calories. The problem is not calories. The problem is sugar, refined carbohydrate. The problem is emulsifiers. The problem is lack of fiber. You can actually fix these things in processed food and improve the health qualities of those foods. And so perhaps this will be a way of being able to have your cake and eat it too, as it were. I will also tell you, I am the chief medical officer of a company that makes a special fiber, okay, that can be added to food. It is engineered. It is made of food ingredients, so it is food. Nothing's been done to it to change the chemical structure or nature of it, but it is fiber that expands in your stomach and forms a 3D matrix, and that 3D matrix sequesters, holds on to, absorbs, latches onto refined carbohydrate and sugars and renders them unavailable for early absorption. Bacteria can chew it up, so you're feeding the gut, and you generate short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, so you are supporting the brain. So just by using this fiber, you adhere to the 3 principles of protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. This can be added to any processed food. There are potential ways to be able to make this work, but it's a battle. Everyone now has an onslaught of dementia, and the question is why? And I'll tell you that there are 3 things you can do to prevent dementia and cut your risk for dementia by 60%. Get rid of the sugar, add omega-3s, and add B vitamins. What I can say is that omega-3s are essential fatty acids. They are required, right? And, unfortunately, our, fish, has omega-3s, but it also has toxins. I understand that. Mercury, heavy metals, various mutagens. Smaller the fish, the higher the omega-3s, and the lower the toxins. So the bigger fish eat the smaller fish, but the smaller fish eat algae. Algae make the omega-3s. The fish eat the algae, we eat the fish. So sardines, anchovies, mackerel, smaller fish turn out to be much better, both in terms of omega-3s and reduction in toxin burden and exposure. It is complicated. I'm not saying it's not, but it can be done.